and Environment Emergency Executive Panel, or SEEP as we all like to call it. The first item on the agenda is the election of chair. So please may I ask if there are any nominations for the chair, please? Councillor Stutley.
Thank you. I'd like to nominate Councillor Hampson, please.
Thank you. We have one nomination. I'm assuming that we have no more. Can I then put that to the vote, please? Sorry, no, the seconder, of course. Thank you. It's seconded by Councillor Oliver. May I put that to the vote, please? All those members voting in favour, please show of hands. Thank you. That is by a majority of votes. So congratulations, Councillor Hampton. I'll pass over to you now to chair the rest of the meeting.
Thank you. And appointment of a vice chair. Can you take nominations for vice chair, please? So we'll go first.
I was going to nominate Councillor Oliver.
Okay. And Councillor Oliver. And nominates Councillor Stephen. Okay. And so take a vote on that, I presume.
I'll second.
Second. Yeah.
Second.
Yeah, okay. So all those for Councillor Carlo.
That's 3 members voting in favour.
And all those against. Okay, and all those against. And all those in favour of Councillor Stevie. Do we have any apologies for absence? Okay. And declarations of interest? No. Minutes, to approve minutes of the meeting held on 27th of March 2022. Has everyone had a chance to look at them? Okay. All those in favour? Okay, the only real item on the agenda is the biodiversity strategy 2022 to 2032. This is a discussion pre-consultation that will happen. We have Adam Giles, who's a cabinet member with responsibility for biodiversity, with us to present and answer questions, I believe. So I'm handing over to Phil, Adam.
Thanks. Thanks so much. Yeah, no, we're here to present our new biodiversity strategy for the next decade. Keen to get your. I'll start again. So we're here to present our biodiversity strategy for the next decade. Keen to get your thoughts prior to it going to public consultation. Following public consultation and revisions, it will then go to Cabinet in November, so it's really key to get your thoughts at this initial stage. I did want to start by thanking Phil Hunt, our Environmental Strategy Manager, to my right, for his brilliant work on the strategy. And in terms of where we are currently, we're not building from a zero base in Norwich. We have been doing work under our previous strategy, so we've got above national average tree canopy cover, we've got the green flag status for Eaton Park, Waterloo Park and Mousehole Heath. We've secured 300k in SIL funding for the creation of new habitats at Kett's Heights to boost biodiversity. We've secured a grant of 30k for Mousehole Heath from Natural England for a higher level stewardship agreement to improve the quantity and quality of heathland and aspen grassland, which, as we know, threaten habitats. We've got around 50 management plans developed for our green spaces, and we look to build upon the strategic partnerships we've formed in recent years, such as the River Basin strategy. In terms of the aims of the strategy, the key aims are to address the environmental and climate emergency strategies as reflected in the emergencies we declared back at full council in 2019. So the first of them is to halt species decline and increase species diversity and abundance by 2030. And the second is to reduce heat, drought, flood risk and improve air and water quality through biodiversity improvements and nature-based solutions. Other aims to improve community health and well-being, to promote nature-based solutions and a low-carbon economy, to enhance tourism and visitor experience, to create new revenue streams and biodiversity net gain off-site arrangements, and to prepare to implement the Environment Act 2021 as part of the government's 25-year environmental action plan. You'll see from this slide that what we've done is we've proposed enhancing the wording of the environmental strategy in 2020. As it currently states, it is to protect and enhance biodiversity and habitat. New wording would be to create a city where biodiversity can recover and thrive, halting species decline, and increasing species diversity and abundance by 2030. In terms of the scope of the strategy, it includes council operations, land and buildings, but it also looks to draw linkages with the green corridors identified in the Greater Norwich Green Infrastructure Strategy, the Greater Norwich Development Partnership is leading on, and the National Nature Recovery Network, which will be led by the County Council driven by the Environment Act 2021. The draft of the strategy has included public engagement. There was a public event at the Falls in November 2021. There's ongoing digital engagement on the Get Talking Norwich website. In terms of the two principal outcomes we have for the strategy, the first of these is to lead the development of a nature recovery strategy specific to Norwich. And the idea of this is to exceed the ambitions as set out in the Environment Act 2021 and to enforce the requirement for 10% biodiversity net gain from new developments. The second aim is to align our council ops with the strategy to contribute to the NRM. This includes significant nature restoration in our parks, open spaces and green spaces, and reviewing our facilities management processes to improve biodiversity. I think I was about to get in trouble by showing this slide. I should stress that the map on the right is an illustration. It's not indicative of where the nature green corridors are going to be. So it's purely up there for illustrative purposes. That's not the finished plan. But this slide does set out the concept of what the Norwich Nature Recovery Network would look like. So we start with our existing parks and green spaces acting as wildlife hubs. And we're looking to interconnect them through nature corridors comprising verges, river valleys, and rows of back gardens, for example. We're then looking to infill the network with smaller green spaces, recognising the contribution to habitats that can be made from physical buildings, flower pots, balconies, etc. This is all in the context of gaining 10% biodiversity net gain from new developments as required under the Environment Act. So, as I've said, the Environment Act 2021 calls for the National Nature Recovery Network to be complete by 2042. We're looking to go further and faster than the government are. We're looking to significantly complete our network by 2030, resulting in not only reducing species decline by 2030, but increasing species diversity and abundance, going further and faster than the government. In terms of our strategic baseline measurement exercise, there was funding set aside for this of £30,000 in the budget that we passed back in February, and we'll develop, implement and measure local nature recovery strategies and set targets for species recoveries. And we'll ensure that we review biodiversity strategy and the action plan that sits beneath it regularly to optimise nature recovery. In terms of tactical actions, we've got a manager biodiversity action plan, as I alluded to, and also a biodiversity opportunities register, which records possibilities of how we can enhance biodiversity across the city through different organisations, different possibilities to be explored, partners and interested parties. And the final slide just lists proposed strategic partners and integrated interested parties. So thank you for your time listening to my presentation. Thank you for all the work that Phil's done on the ground for making this happen. And we're happy to take questions. We've got here today, we've got Phil, who's the Environmental Strategy Manager. We've got Helen Chamberlain, the Head of Service, who's the Head of Strategy, Comms and Culture, is that right? Got that right. We've also got Sarah Ashurst, who's the Head of Planning and Regulatory Services, and Andy Summers, the Head of Environment Services. I believe Sarah needs to go at 5, so questions relating to her service area you may want to think about asking early on in the discussion, but I'll pass back to the Chair now.
Thanks a lot, Adam, and again, thanks to Phil and everyone else involved in bringing all this together. Before we open it up, Phil, anyone else, is there anything you want to add? No? Brilliant. Then take questions. If you keep it to kind of a single question in one area, I'll go around to many people who want to ask, and then background again, just to make sure everyone gets a chance to ask something. So, any questions? So, Councillor Carter first.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Are we able to ask some questions but also comments, or we ask some questions?
Yeah, questions or comments. Sorry.
So, my first question, yes, it's very important to have strategy. It's very high level. It's 3 pages. And so, is the Council going to produce an action plan to consult on alongside the strategy, or is it going to be producing an action plan separately, consultation later on? Well, I think in some ways an action plan paints a fuller picture for those people to
So consultation and strategy sets the framework in which the action plan and what register beneath that is
No, I'll come back. Questions, comments? Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you. It's interesting. It's been very interesting going through the strategy, and there's a lot of hopeful stuff. One of the things which struck me was the draft strategy has been informed by an external expert advice from East of England LGA. And we understand also that the strategy has been peer-reviewed by a UEA academic. Can you share the peer-reviewed comments with us?
Councillor Lovett.
Yeah, yes, thank you. I do agree with Councillor Cavallo that it's the action plan that has most of the nitty-gritty, and it's so much easier to comment on an action plan than what's in here, because then you know how we go about doing it. But on page 10, we boast at £300,000 in civil funding was secured for investment creation of new habitat at Tech Park, and also 30,000 from the Nassau Quay. Have we any? I mean, over what period is that money leaving from us still? I mean, is it £300,000 in 1 year? It doesn't seem much for the length of time that SIL has been in operation. In fact, it's appalling. But you know, obviously, you're ambitious and want to bring more money from SIL to the biodiversity strategy. But I just think, you know, that's not a great sort of figure to be talking about. And where is the ability to pour more money in from SIL to create better biodiversity.
That's one example. I know that SIL and other actions going on through our community, including approaches across the organisation of the council, are very much focused on biodiversity and on supporting, for example, local groups to take over pieces of land and support them to invest biodiversity in those areas. So that's one example, but there is more that goes on within SIL and beyond SIL as well through our community. And I can get you some specific details on the time frame for that 300,000 if you've got that to hand. So we can come back on that specifically. But as I say, it's an example of some of the investment that's been made, but it's not the totality of it.
But reading here, it just looks as though we've had £300,000 or £330,000 from SIL, and it doesn't tell us what period it's been. And so you just feel, of course, that's not good really. We want more than that. And there's nothing in here, I don't think, about how we intend to go forward to expect more, really.
Well, again, so I think the strategy helps with that in the sense that this is thinking about neighbourhoods in particular as where we've been able to access those pots set up community groups and so on. The clarity of the strategy in terms of our ambition and how that sits across other priorities helps us therefore to enable that we can continue that focus and we can make decisions around SIL neighbourhood funding with that lens. And so it's, it was often didn't draw it very well in the slides, but it's just given as an example. It's not supposed to be the whole picture. But as I said, I can come back to you in time.
Thank you. Any questions from those who haven't asked? So, Councillor Carter first.
Hi, thank you. I was wondering what processes you have been considering to engage with more, I suppose, passive voices in Norwich, so those who want actively engaged in the biodiversity plan and maybe the academics, so more marginalised people in the community.
We have a number of projects underway actually at the moment through our community and agency, again, the crisis team in my service area. And pick an example is that we have a community conversations project going on at the moment where we've recruited a group of sort of community connectors who come from the neighbourhoods that they're representing, and the idea there is to trial different ways of accessing different people who wouldn't normally respond to a consultation and say, or who wouldn't normally get involved with what the council is doing. That's a sort of trial project at the moment. It seems to be going very well. Again, that's one of the routes that we want to get this consultation out through those connections that we've made in communities already. So we will be using that as part of this process.
So, follow-up.
Yes.
So I understand the Community Connectors programme terminates quite soon. Are there plans to continue that project?
We are hopeful that we've got some funding that will enable us to do that.
That's great.
I have Councillor Stephen next.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and thank you to officers and Councillor Giles for the report. It's an excellent strategy, and I think there's a lot that can come from this. My question is about the new wording you described in your report about halting species declining and increasing abundance. Do we have any baseline figures for those by which we'll make judgments in this time? Please.
So the baseline work will be done at the initial stage of the strategy, and 30,000 was set aside in the budget we passed in February to fund that work.
Thank you.
I had Councillor Carley. You have another question?
Yes, the strategy proposes lots of further new strategies and policies. But my concern is actually there's been a whole lot of strategy and policy to date, and not all of it's been implemented. So we started in 2007 with the infrastructure study, and there was one in 2009. And it was adopted as part of the Joint Field Strategy for Norwich and South Norfolk. And as part of that, there was a mapping exercise of the ecological corridors in 2007 in Norwich. And part of that now is shown in the screen just now at the city centre. That hasn't been implemented at all. In terms of the green infrastructure, in my view, there has been a loss of non-designated green infrastructure in Norwich, and that includes things like partial development of playing fields for all-weather pitches, or school playing fields for housing. Also, there hasn't been the opportunity to create new green infrastructure, and I'm thinking here of green roofs and walls, for example, has not been taken. In my view, there has been an overall loss of informal green infrastructure in Norwich. And in addition, we've got Norwich is largely circled by road barriers on the southern bypass and the NDR. Which has cut off the links between biodiversity in the city and also the surrounding countryside. There is a policy already in the Development Management Plan, policy DM3, on delivering high quality design, little I, and that was adopted in 2014. And that encouraged green infrastructure and redevelopment, and along with this, created biodiversity rich environment for the design of built structures and landscaping, etc., etc. But that policy is applied very inconsistently. So in some new developments, there are biodiversity features included, in some informal green space, but in a lot of developments, that doesn't happen. And in relation to the ecological mapping, I'm concerned that actually the definition has not changed as such, but has become very reliant on cycle links. And so if you look at the green infrastructure study from December 2020, which informs the Greater Norwich Local Plan, and you look at the different development allocations and how they're going to be circling new green links, there's a very great focus on cycle links. And under each of the allocations, or the set of allocations, there was a reference to cycle links on the riverside walk. And there hasn't actually been any active creation of ecological corridors across Norwich. Take the example of the River Benson. There's a River Benson strategy, for example. But as the River Benson passes through the city centre and as development areas have been developed alongside, the chance wasn't taken to improve biodiversity, and I'm thinking, for example, of St Anne's Wall, the very hard steps there, or Geoffrey Watling Way, which has got absolute minimal biodiversity features, and there's very little biodiversity platforms along the river. So I feel that there has been a lot of policy put in place, a lot of strategy, but that it hasn't been implemented. And so I am very concerned that I see exactly the same proposals now going forward, and I wonder how Norwich is going to look in 10 years' time, given actually that we've lost so much. So, for example, looking at Norwich City Norwich, we've lost the golf course at Hamilton, which was a really important green space. We're losing a hell of a lot of countryside around Norwich, and there's very little to substitute for it. And so I don't have any sense of how Norwich is going to look in 10 years' time based on the past 15 years of policy. So that is, in almost concerned, I'm almost very concerned.
Can we, I think there's quite a lot of points in there. Can we pause and see if anyone wants to come back on some of them? I think there's a few things where various people might want to pick up.
I'll try and keep it fairly succinct. There's a lot to remember from that, so forgive me if I forget something. I think from my perspective and from a planning perspective, the big thing that's changed in recent years is the Environment Bill and bringing that in. I recognise absolutely DM3, you know, is a design-orientated policy, and I think it maybe hasn't set the same level of requirement as the new Environment Bill will do moving forward. So I think that this kind of step change in planning policy enables us to say to developers, you must improve biodiversity on your sites, and that has not been in place before now. I don't, if I'm honest, get a sense that most any of our biodiversity in the city actually we're quite good at kind of keeping what we've got and enhancing it where we can. Obviously those sites you kind of cited, the Royal Norfolk Golf Club and kind of periphery sites in the city, they're not within our control, unfortunately. What we're doing now with the Green Infrastructure Plan will kind of help inform and support this biodiversity strategy and get that baseline in terms of looking at, you know, have we lost anywhere, where are we, where are the gaps that are missing in our green infrastructure, and the kind of evidence base that Councillor Giles alluded to earlier sits within the planning policy team. We're going to be looking at a baseline survey of our species, our flora, our fauna, our trees, all of it to get that baseline so that as we move forward and apply that new policy requirement, not just encouragement but requirement, we can actually then over the next few years really monitor how we are helping the species, both those ones which are doing well but predominantly those ones which are also in decline, and to kind of looking at kind of trees and green spaces and how we can protect those even further. Leading on from the adoption of the GNLP, we'll review our DM policies as well, so there's a further opportunity at that point to further strengthen and enhance biodiversity as we move forward to those local policies rather than just the strategy for Greater Norwich. So there's another kind of opportunity to really get those hooks in there for developers as well. And then ultimately what this baseline, the green infrastructure study, this biodiversity strategy will all kind of lead towards is that supplementary planning document that we can require developers not only to do that kind of 10%, but really direct them towards what they can be doing on site. So improvements to SUDs, which will also help address nutrient neutrality, not wanting to bring up that word in here, but also kind of, you know, targeting those specific things which actually make a difference to the species, the flora and the fauna and that kind of thing as well. So, but also where we have and know about sites which maybe are struggling or need some help or would fill those gaps in that green infrastructure, we can then keep a register of those, and if somebody couldn't provide biodiversity net gain on their site, they can make a tangible contribution towards delivery of a real kind of project to deliver biodiversity elsewhere. I'm aware as a council we've probably own pockets of land which are too small to develop or be meaningful, but too big to just let it sit there and do nothing, and they present a real opportunity, even just, you know, breathing spaces, let's be honest. But you know, somebody can then kind of make a tangible contribution to that and work with the Fringe project to maintain those. You know, that would really enhance our biodiversity across the city as well. So I think there's a multitude of ways, and this really is the first step in actually making a difference kind of outside the windows to improving our biodiversity across the city. I don't know if I've missed anything. I hope not.
I think, yes, you could say something about ecological corridors and green routes. I do recognise that sometimes cycle routes and the riverside walk example, they are important green things, but they're not always accompanied by biodiversity improvements. And so it has been sad that we haven't had any development of the ecological corridor. We spoke the other day about, say, for example, the city centre, and chances have been missed there, for example, for creating green routes or other sort of stepping stones.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the River Wenton strategy was a really great project to kind of improve people's access and enjoyment to the river, and there's a new arm coming forward in that to kind of, as well as supporting those aims and priorities, but to improve the biodiversity of the river as well. So I think that would be really important. And again, kind of thinking about cycle links and pedestrian links throughout the city, I think, as I say, this biodiversity net gain will be the requirement, not just encouragement, but the requirement of developers to contribute to biodiversity improvement. We'll see those links kind of being enhanced to improve biodiversity, but also actually just creating a green corridor that maybe doesn't relate to anybody else using it. And that's where this green infrastructure map will really help us on the baseline of our species as well. So it will all hopefully nicely knit together into a nice little green job production.
Is it very related, or I will come back this time. Councillor Lovett?
Yes, on that basis that you feel that they are going to increase that amount of biodiversity, not in terms of species, but in terms of space, should we not include it in the aims under 3.3? We say one of the 5 themes of the vision is to create a living city, protecting and maintaining green living spaces. What about protecting, maintaining and increasing? Because it does need an increase. I think one's expecting an awful lot to increase the species without increasing the space that they have. So I do think we need to be ambitious and say increasing it as well as protecting it and maintaining. And that's obviously what will come with this 10% through the developers.
Yes, I mean, I think in the presentation, probably in the strategies, the network comprises hubs, corridors, and infill, and there is an expectation that the hubs and the corridor, hubs in particular, will increase. So yes, increasing in spaces as part of the strategy, less developable land perhaps. Further opportunity to
And one might say, under interested parties, people who can work with and everything else. Interested parties, we've got the council executive, administration and the cabinet, they're interested parties. But not all the councils. We can put that in names. Oh, good, we're in there. And parish councils, I mean, I don't mind being in there, but we don't have any. But they might contribute if they're just beyond their boundaries, I suppose.
connectivity with our immediate surroundings is important, especially as we take part in developing, playing our part in developing the national nature. So yes, we look at beyond our immediate boundaries to our neighbours.
And I did read a piece in the Times back in January with a national trust for creating green corridors in the Sutton Park, and they're just buying up land. You know, could we ask the National Trust if we can be one of their, I think it's something like 20 new green corridors in the city centres and the farming countryside. I've only talked about one, that's the Bath one. But perhaps they ought to be on our list that we work with.
So, Councillor Champion next.
So I've got there's a few questions, but I can come back to some of them. The one which is about the space line, which has been referred to, which has got 30,000 allocated to it. I'm curious about how we're going to ascertain the space line in relation to the fact that we've got two comments already in the session where there's been perceptions about either loss or gain of biodiversity. So we don't know where we were. 30,000 doesn't seem like an awful lot. I mean, it sounds like a lot, I guess, on one level, but on another level, to do a comprehensive biodiversity baseline study for the whole of Norwich, it seems incredibly ambitious. So I'd be very interested to understand the methodology, who's going to conduct it. Is it going to incorporate soil analysis? Is it going to just be birds or insects? Are we doing the whole caboodle? I just need a bit of detail, please.
Yes. So we're currently drafting the brief. Obviously, the budget for this was only set in February, so we're currently drafting the brief. It's my full intention to be a full habitat survey, so we'll look at species, flora, fauna, trees, etc. And will be done by a qualified ecologist. It may be that if £30,000 isn't sufficient, then we'll need to come back for further budget asks. But from my kind of experience elsewhere, that's about what a consultant ecologist would require to do this work for us on our behalf. I'm not aware whether at this point in time whether the brief would need to be agreed, but we might be able to bring it through Sustainable Development Panel for members' consideration if that would be something you'd be interested in seeing.
Thank you.
Any further questions, comments? Go on, Councillor Franklin.
So, I've only been a councillor a year. In the last year, I got assured repeatedly that we've already had a policy of not using pesticide, which I understand is something we're now implementing. So it confuses me a little bit because I was assured that we already were not using pesticides in our green spaces. So I just wanted a bit of clarity on this. So is this already something we're doing, or is it something we're about to do?
Andy, happy to answer that.
Yeah. There was a project we did probably about a year ago whereby we would look to eliminate use of pesticides on commercial property. Now, for a variety of reasons, that's not been implemented yet, and we've got a project initiation document all ready to go with aims and objectives in it and how we would achieve that. And we've also got NCSL on board to carry out environmental operations on our behalf. So there's been an aspiration and an ambition there, and also a project outline there. It just hasn't been implemented yet, and that's certainly something we can either tie in with the biodiversity strategy to make sure it's implemented, or something we could consider separately. I think there's some chair on that, but something that we want to consider separately as part of this panel. So, to answer your question, Councillor Champion, it hasn't been implemented yet. There is a kind of draft set waiting to go. It's on the launch pad, but not yet.
Thank you.
Councillor Colley?
Yes, Sarah gave a description about the biodiversity baseline study, and I'm concerned that it's going to be a sort of traditional approach whereby you look at the designated sites, things like county wildlife sites, the river valleys, parks and so on. But I'm also concerned about the sort of small scrubby bits, which are really important for wildlife. And those are areas which are being eradicated through development and not really valued. And it's really the commonplace which is so important for biodiversity. Whereas at the moment, the emphasis is on measuring some of the key species, the rare species or threatened species, but actually they've only become threatened because they've been lost as commonplace. And I'm talking about things like patches of bordure, patches of rough ground, and so on and so forth. And how those are going to be captured by any baseline study. So I'm keen to see that a biodiversity study also looks at, measures the amount of green space there is left in Norwich. And I'm thinking about not only the formal but the informal space, and also the scrubby bits, which are probably more important in some ways than, well, just as valuable as the designated bits. So that's one of my concerns. And I think I did raise this the other day in council, suggesting measurement of different land use types at ward level. So you look at, you measure, say, land allocated to housing, land allocated to transport. You go through the whole, to the long list, including green. And Oxford City Council has done that on a ward basis, and it throws up quite a few interesting things. And I don't know if that's possible, but I know in some ways that's alongside any habitat survey. So that's one of my questions. My second question.
Can we just do one at a time, if that's okay? I think there's just as much common those questions, if anyone does have anything to add on this side to that.
Just to say that I think you're absolutely right. I think that the green infrastructure mapping will need to look at those intermittent areas because they're the kind of sporadic links between those kind of biodiversity hubs, as Bill kind of describes them, which are probably those more designated spaces. So absolutely, I think the green infrastructure mapping will look at that and include, we can certainly include in the brief kind of an assessment of what's there and the valuable or invaluable part that those in the pocket spaces play, because they will be the things that form the links for the green infrastructure moving forward. So I'm happy to include that. Turning to the second point about measurements of kind of land use type, we've got quite a bit of information already about land use types across the whole city. We can possibly kind of overlay those. I don't know that it goes down quite so far as kind of intermittent green spaces. We've certainly got tree cover, housing, employment, commercial, etc. I'd be quite interested to know what kind of I can approach Oxford. I've got a contact there to kind of have a conversation with them about how they've done it and potentially look at it. I think we've probably got quite a lot of that information already. It's just how we can actually put it together to support our women in this work. So, yeah.
That's part of their biodiversity strategy.
Okay. Any other questions before I come back to Councillor Carlo? Councillor Stevie?
Thank you, Chair. Just following up on that, actually, there was a series of maps that one of our officers has produced, Ben Webster, that map a number of really interesting things across the city. Perhaps we could share those with members of this committee.
Yeah, happy to do that. It's a bit of a project that Ben's team did over COVID because we have got, as I say, this is probably where 80% of that information comes from. We've got a lot of stuff mapped. Because they are quite interesting and informative, we're actually looking at displaying them up on the third floor to support kind of planning officers in their work. So when they're up there, you're more than welcome to come up to the third floor and take a look. So definitely, if necessary, I can ask Ben to do a bit of a kind of an informal presentation of some of the information for you.
That would be excellent. They are fabulous maps as well.
You've got Councillor Udder and Chaplain.
Just another suggestion, really. So Plymouth Council have done some work in this area as well. So that was a case study that would be an interesting one to follow. And again, I have some. Probably I can offer some support on the technical side as well.
Apologies, Councillor, I didn't hear which council.
Plymouth.
Okay, Councillor Campbell.
So I was going to ask about training. It ties into my previous question about pesticides. There was a green space in my ward that got sprayed with pesticide. It's still a barren area. I got told it was a mistake on behalf of frontline staff. This year I've encountered multiple occurrences of hedge cutting during the bird nesting season, which concerns me, and when I made an inquiry about it, I was told that this isn't something that we do as a council, that there's already policy about not doing it, and so it struck me that there was mixed messaging going on there. There was also grass cutting, unnecessary grass cutting, not in like central like playing areas, but on grass cutting in parks in areas which just for aesthetic reasons during May. And I know that we had like I know it wasn't policy, but there was no mow May, and sort of like we were going to not cut, but we aren't cutting. It strikes me that, and just in relation to some of the previous points about previous strategy and policy which maybe wasn't implemented very effectively, I just want to make sure that what we now implement is implemented effectively. And I would be interested to know if there is going to be training for frontline staff so that they are informed and this isn't just word salad coming from council top. If that makes any sense.
But absolutely that need to help staff understand both this and the wider sort of climate action work that we are taking forward in the university is absolutely one of the actions we want to take on, to make sure that people understand that they can get out of the work. And it's just spreads in the DNA of the implementation. So that's a key part of doing, and also particularly access.
There's a couple of things here that I can try and provide some reassurance for Councillor Champion. One is that the adoption of the Council's private diversity strategy is in CSL's business plan for the next couple of years, so there's a commitment there that whatever the strategy comes up with at the end of the process will be implemented by NCSL. We're also looking at a review of the services that they provide. We start working with Phil to identify where we can enhance biodiversity throughout the site as a key part of the strategy, and also review to look at where we can change our maintenance methods to enhance and improve biodiversity. So that process will hopefully be starting, the review process will hopefully be starting within the next month, and we aim to have it complete by the end of this year in consultation with stakeholders and start to implement that for the next year's growing season. And that's where we are at the moment for that.
Thank you.
So what it doesn't address, sorry, is the training, but that needs to follow on from that for frontline staff. But that's where we are as a service.
I have Councillor Lovett next.
Following on from that, it is communicating with the public about why things are being done in a different way, and so they understand. But also, I mean, working with partners. Norfolk County Council now do all cutting of street urges, thank you. And they really are not on the road. I'd speak to some people stuff that they work on. They now say they want to leave a little bit of green space in front of their houses to do a flower meadow. It's quite a wide space, and there's no guarantee that Norfolk County Council will let them do that. So I do think it does present certain challenges with Norfolk, especially this time when they do so much in the city. Grass verges are important. They are to some extent the corridors that lead a lot of houses, and if they could get buy-in, I suppose. You can't tell them everything because they're in charge, but they do need to row in with them this biodiversity strategy and to cut the grass less and to encourage residents who say that they want to create a space outside their homes for flowers and take that into account. Now, it may cost you. I don't know whether it costs more. It certainly costs more in their time not to do it and to take time to remember that they don't cut that space or cut it in a certain way at a certain time. So that's going to be a bit more nuanced for them in the future if you can get them to buy into our strategy.
For information, really, Norfolk County Council are the partners that we're working on green infrastructure mapping project with. So they are around the table in terms of looking at this. So certainly I can kind of feedback through the officers that as a potential idea. And we keep saying no guarantees that I can get them to do it, but we can certainly highlight it as important green corridors and see if we can make any influence there.
Because I do think the public are going to be very much our partners in this, and if they want to do something, we should encourage them and not cut down things that they've just planted. But some of the planted whips alongside the hedge and it's a bit road, and the cutter just came along and cut more down. It's something that's happening now, and hopefully we can get them to change.
I can add something in there. DEFRA deemed county to be the responsible party for delivering the national population recovery network in this area. And so what we've done by publishing our own biodiversity strategy is we've stated what we want. We've got out there we made statements actually. So legislation brings the county council to
two would be taken to look at that. Specifically, yes.
Okay. Are there any?
Andy was
Oh, sorry, Andy.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. Yeah, I've had conversations with my council about this previously, and certainly they were keen to implement anything to the strategy. That's at officer level. I think there's maybe some work to do at a political level. Certainly, the officers are keen to get involved in this.
Thank you. Any more questions? And I'm aware Sarah has to go fairly soon, so are there any last quick ones in that area? Okay.
On that specific area, I was just going to say it's obviously a high-level strategic document and no statutory need to consider crime and disorder, but I was wondering how responsive will be if anything, possibly small issues come up. For example, I was thinking if you have lovely grass fair, which has got wildflowers in it, and then someone's letting their dog go to the limit, that sort of thing, that kind of thing that creates health issues and also a lot of disturbance for residents. How responsive can we be to that? Or will it be a case of reporting from the strategy? Or alternatively, nice other people to go and get some antisocial things
I'm not aware that any improvement to biodiversity would negate our responsibilities in terms of antisocial behaviour to residents. See, Andy wants to add.
Yeah, it's okay. We've got experience of implementing something similar in previous roles, and that was a concern that was expressed. I had to introduce some of the changes that we made, but there was absolutely no evidence post-implementation that that's what happened. There was no impact on answers really at all. Not no increase certainly.
Councillor Carr?
Yes, question, well, a point to Sarah. I suppose I feel really troubled by the fact that it is the Environment Act which is going to be driving things in the future, but the policies and strategies have been developed over a number of years that, in a sense, they've not carried so much weight, so to be applied consistently. And I just hope that the Environment Act regime does deliver, because actually I'm not that confident in the Act, because it does talk about halting the decline of biodiversity by 2030, when I think it should be about reversing long before then, because if we could get to 2030 and allow more biodiversity to be lost. I suppose my question is, Sarah, about working with the adjoining councils who are part of the Greater Norwich Authority. And so, although obviously the City of Norwich developing its own policies, nonetheless we have to work in conjunction. And obviously biodiversity is stuck on an administrative boundary as well. And we need to work with the county council in terms of the biodiversity partnership. And so I wonder, through the biodiversity partnership, are things sort of hotting up? Because when you look at the website of the biodiversity partnership, it seems to be very moribund, with some of these strategies last being updated into 2010 or 2014. So is there a resource from all the different authorities who are buying into that partnership to actually develop more resources to biodiversity in their district and within the councils that are working?
I can't authoritatively speak about the resources and other authorities, unfortunately, but I am aware that there is a commitment from all the Greater Norwich authorities to kind of look at this green infrastructure mapping. A lot of all the Norfolk authorities are actually also working with the Suffolk authorities to do some much more kind of eastern region work on kind of biodiversity and improvement. So I think the Environment Bill has kick-started a movement to really bring this to the fore, which I think is really positive.
And obviously the Greater Norwich Local Plan, when adopted, hopefully in the first half of next year, will see this biodiversity net gain requirement come in, which I think is much stronger than the previous policy that we've had. So I generally feel like things are moving forward, and I can certainly take back through the Greater Norwich Project Board your questions about resources and commitment to the biodiversity partnership and feedback to you. Councillor Stevie, then Councillor Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think it's a question for Helen, really. We talked about the engagement with the community, individuals and businesses. I wondered if there's a role for individuals to help us with the collection of data in terms of survey.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we're quite keen to explore, the whole sort of citizen science idea, and that's something that came up in the pre-consultation community engagement that we had in November in the halls. And I think one of the reasons that we're approaching this as we are is because we have got the community that if we're going to suggest, changes to their local areas, changes to their parks, they've got to buy into that too, they've got to get involved in that too. And as people have said, part of the solution is people's back gardens, people's front verges, all of that stuff. So I think anything we can do to make them feel engaged in it and make them buy into it and help them to buy into it would be helpful. We haven't worked out all of the detail of the consultation process yet, but it's something that we want to consider, I think, as a citizen science approach. But also we haven't worked through the details yet. We need to do.
Councillor Campbell.
Just in relation, we keep on talking about gardens. One of the aspects of gardens cultural shift is that there's increasing amounts of astroturf and increasing amounts of decking and hard paving. It links in with the whole suds and the whole idea of our ability to prevent flash flooding. And I would be interested if there's anything that we can do to encourage private individuals in their own properties to not be decimating and creating gaps in these wildlife corridors.
Again, I think that has to be part of our communication plans around all this. So, starting with the engagement that we've had and the consultation of the planning, but then, above and beyond that, campaigns and communication campaigns over time to help raise awareness to this and to help people understand how they can make a contribution, even small, and that is a relevant thing. I think people often feel that my small back garden doesn't make any difference actually. When you join people up as a second corridors, then it does. So again, I think through our communications team, through our community enabling teams, we've got to try and get that message out and ask of action plans. But that's definitely an ambition that we want to get that message out. Sadly, we can't all people do it, but we can certainly help.
Yes, thank you for making that point, Helen. The Nelson Ward is a critical drainage area, and one of the reasons is because there's so much hard surface in there, housing, small back gardens with extensions, and paving over front and back gardens. And so we've created a little problem, surface water risk flooding problem ourselves. So I think it's really important to educate people. But also the planners can play a role as well. And I'm looking at the annual monitoring report, the Joint Core Strategy, and it specifically says that there are a large number of residential homes across the Greater Norwich area which are seen as a supply of land for housing. And that they ought to be these green stepping stones and not building them, because we're just making a hotter city, we're making a city that's more risk of flooding, we're creating a city where there's a nutrient problem in relation to the rivers. So anyway, my question I want to ask is about resources within the City Council. So item paragraph 10 on page 11 says delivery of the strategy will have to be managed by a cross-council biodiversity working group existed from the Central Environment Strategy team. So I wanted to ask what additional resources the team are going to have. And I think Phil mentioned a biodiversity officer. And also to then ask how the team is going to work across the whole council. We've heard about grounds maintenance, which is good. We've heard a bit about development control, which is good. We've heard, and obviously that's going to, hopefully, going to inform delivery of housing. We've heard about engaging the community. So hopefully all those things, that the environment team will drive that across the council. That's what I'm assuming, with new biodiversity and playing a very key role and ranging across the whole council and informing quality.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So there's a few bits to that. We've got, I guess, the first part of it is that, as you'll remember, through the senior management restructure that happened back last April, Stephen's plan to move the environmental strategy function into the central area. One of the big reasons for that was to make sure that it sits centrally and it can then therefore coordinate and ensure actions taken place across the organisation. So that's what we're doing. Phil's team sits within my sort of strategy corporate strategy function. So that's a key part of it. And we have had funding put into the budget for this year and future years to fund the extra posts that we're talking about. And we're working out the exact details about exactly what we need. So certainly key to that, and we'll have someone starting work on some of this stuff very shortly. In fact, not like a permanent person necessarily, but working on it. So the idea is that that biodiversity working group is absolutely cross-council. All of the key players are involved. The strategy has been developed, has been collaborative, and the relevant sales are also being drawn into it. And so that's the beginning of creating that group. So we know we need to be in that group. Just setting up and getting it running and run that as a proper sort of environmental management approach. So that's absolutely the intention, and the funding and sort of positioning the team is there to do it.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Champion.
With relation to the 10% biodiversity, can I encourage that is referred to as a minimum? Because I feel like, with relation to the fact, as is highlighted in the report, that 68% fall in population of biodiversity in the last half century, I feel like 10% isn't much in relation to what we've lost. So I would ask that we're more ambitious than the bare minimum asked for in the environmental strategy from the government or the environmental bill, so that we can be more ambitious. So I'd ask that that be a minimum. I'm curious about adaptation of habitat in relation to climate change. There are now birds migrating to the UK which are not native. We're going to get new invasive species. Some of those species might well be better adapted, and it might be necessary to create habitat for them. Have we considered the changing climate in relation to habitat creation? So for instance, as an example of this, tree planting. Are we considering what trees will be most adapted to future climate scenarios, or are we basing our decision-making process on what has happened previously, which obviously won't be suitable?
Yes, we will consider the effects of climate change, changing habitats. I think picking up on Councillor Fellow on earlier, the field ecology study that we're about to undertake has to be implemented. It has to go beyond kind of norms. This is an urban nature recovery network. I was just flipping through my words. I certainly have referenced to consider changes climate change. And how that affects ecology. So it's that.
Okay.
sorry, I just want to say on the 10% point, we'll note that. We need to obviously have discussions about it and give it through the final draft. We'll note it as a comment and consider that.
Thank you.
Councillor
Just a comment, really. I think that the action plan will be really data hungry and evidence hungry. So the baselining, I think, essentially address some of the issues around climate change. So if that's right, then we can monitor going forward. So it's just kind of making sure that the evidence base is really robust. That's underpins a lot of the decisions that go alongside it. Thanks.
Sorry. No, I was just a comment. I mean, where we've been going for over an hour on this now, and most people have had several goes, so if they've got some last comments, questions, anyone wants to make? Carlo?
I've got a small question, please, and that is the River Webson Strategy Partnership, and how, in what way they will engage in the consultation, given actually that the City Council chairs that particular partnership. I don't know if there's a sort of, I think there is a separate working party.
Might be a question that best asked to Sarah over email, unless Helen has got an answer.
My understanding is that there is a separate working party, but I'm not pretty sure, so yeah, we can have that.
Because obviously the River Webson is a critical party.
Any other final questions on things in the Councillor Lovett?
One of the aims is to encourage people to discover wildlife, to enjoy wildlife, and to improve their well-being. This can't be done by just sort of opening the gates to speak for our marshes and saying, please come in. It does mean work has to go on to sort of encourage people, whether it's simply taking people for a walk or special days for children, picnics and things like that. Have you thought about how we're going to actually encourage people to imbibe in wildlife in a way that they don't know?
Again, not in great detail yet, but it has been sort of engagement and communication plan and sort of campaigning approach afterwards. I think that's the key role. So we also have our events teams and our community enabling teams, and it's again here to think about how we can use those opportunities to deliver the strategies. So it's all the next specific thing.
I think just on the specific example of Sweetbriar Marshes, you probably saw in the press, the Norwich Wildlife Trust has been successful in people raising funds.
Have they raised your money?
They raised 50%, and then Aviva match funded the other 300,000. Yes, I know Matt Davis and Norwich Fringe Project is working with the Norwich Wildlife Trust, and I know Andy, do you have something else?
I wasn't going to be specific to that, but all I want to say was that we do already have those, we do already link some of those activities through the Fringe Project, and also through the staff that we have up at MSOP. They're really, really popular. The number of volunteer hours that we manage through those two activities is really quite
but
impressive.
I think people like Matt Davis and the two wardens is stretched at the moment. I mean, Matt Davis is really groups that want to use on help with their project. And so we really do need to look at that.
Okay, Councillor Stevie.
Thank you, Chair. Just a comment, I wanted to reiterate my thanks to all the officers for putting this together and for answering questions honestly and positively. So to reiterate my support for this document.
That feels like a nice place to end it on, unless there's anything completely burning. I'm sure you can email Adam with any more specific questions. But yeah, just to reiterate, thank you very much for your work on this and for being here to answer questions. So I think that's us done.